Hello, Starshine. My name is Liz and this is my channel, Simsational Stories. If you have not seen my videos before and you enjoy this one, please like and subscribe. And maybe check out my Facebook page where this whole thing began as well. All relevant links are in the description below. And of course, if you're a Sims player and you'd like to download any of the characters featured in my stories, just search the hashtag Simsational Stories on the Sims 4 gallery. All original content is created by This Is Not Eric. Alrighty then. So, welcome, and what is up, Buttercup? Are you having a good day? Or a bad day? Whichever your answer, please allow me to distract you from your life and tell you a story, a Simsational story. Before I begin though, I'd like to issue this blanket content and trigger warning. The following story is just Sims, hey. I'm not going to apologise for treating them terribly, if that's what I've done, But I do want to assure you now that although I mean absolutely no harm, I completely understand if you feel unable to consume my content. Many loves, and we will catch each other on the internet elsewhere. Okay, so now we've gotten that over with, let's go. Today's story is from Whitman, the Audacious Maid, and we're at chapter 6. If you have not seen previous chapters and would like to catch up, there are playlists available on my channel so you can hear the entire story in chronological order. The rest of us are going to move on from where we left off last time though. So without further ado. Bringing Cassie home had made it all come back to reality. Taking care of her daughter took up Audrey's whole being. Almost to the point of it being a problem, Anton thought. She had always been the kind of partner who prepared a nice meal for him to come home to after work, but nowadays it seemed like the only person she cared to feed was the baby. Some days, Anton almost felt like he was living alone. He would come home from work and, if he was lucky, he would sometimes find a cold plate waiting for him in the refrigerator. More often than not, though, there would be nothing there, nothing made, and the whole apartment silent. The nursery door was always closed, but he knew they were in there. Sometimes, rarely, he would hear the baby crying quietly for a few moments. But that was it. Audrey never came out to greet him, and he never went in there. Audrey would hear him come home, but she stayed where she was. She had begun to resent Anton and the way he seemed to have basically no part in any of this. Cassandra was his daughter too. He had helped to create her. So why wasn't he helping to look after her? It had only been a month, but he still hadn't changed a single nappy or filled a single bottle. Audrey was doing it all on her own. And it wasn't easy. There was a huge learning curve. Babies were hard. Audrey had never been around children much before, and her own mother was halfway across the country and too busy to even answer the phone anyway. Audrey had absolutely no idea what the heck she was supposed to be doing here, and she never had anyone to turn to, nobody to talk to about it, nobody to help. Anton was always at work. Audrey was starting to feel burnt out. Nothing was getting done. The house was a mess. She was a mess. And she didn't even care anymore. She was flat out just trying to figure out how to deal with Cassie and sort of take care of herself as well these days, let alone take the time to load the dishwasher and clean the counters or vacuum. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered. It was enough that she got through the day. This was when Anton sprung the idea of Mount Komorebi on her. He had been offered a position as a general on a base there, and of course, he would have to move there, to Mount Komorebi. Just temporarily, though. 3 months, 6 months tops, before he would be able to transfer back home to Evergreen Harbour with a much higher rank and, of course, a much higher paycheck to match. Now, Anton wanted Audrey and Cassandra to come with him, Of course he did, but he showed her photos. The amenities on the base didn't exactly support family life. And everyone wanted to holiday in Mount Komorabi these days too. So the few rentals that there were obviously impossible to get at an affordable price. Besides, they already had a perfect home they owned here in Evergreen Harbour. The only sensible solution was for Anton to go to Mount Komorabi without his family and just stay on base like a normal soldier, then come back home to them once his promotion was permanent. Audrey couldn't wrap her head around it at first. Mount Komorabi was so far away. How could Anton be serious? Didn't he see how much she was struggling as it was? Every day was worse than the last. And Audrey worried that without the tiny amounts of adult stimulation Anton gave her each evening, that she might go utterly mad. She already felt like a slave to her baby, basically. And this would just make everything worse. She didn't usually go off at Anton, but Audrey was desperate to get through to him. She couldn't handle this. He couldn't leave her. She was already drowning under the weight of motherhood, and she didn't want him to go. She wanted him to stay here and be more present at home. Their daughter was almost 6 months old now, and he barely knew her. If he went away for months to Mount Komorabi, by the time he came back, Cassie would be a toddler. Did he really want to miss all that? Anton listened to Audrey for as long as he could, about 5 minutes, before he finally ran out of patience with her. She was being ridiculous, drowning under the weight of motherhood. He had never heard something so melodramatic in his life. It was ridiculous. She was failing, was what she was doing. The house was a pigsty, and he was downright sick of coming home to it, and her. After their argument, Anton had stormed out, leaving Audrey alone in the apartment. She felt like she'd been sucker punched, right in the heart. She was a wreck that night, and spent the whole night crying alone in their bedroom, while Anton never came home. She never knew where he'd gone that night, and she was always too afraid to ask. Anton finally came home 3 days later after work, but he didn't say a word to Audrey as he stalked past her into the bedroom. She was still hurt by all the horrible things he'd said, and was a little scared to go to him in case it started another argument. So she too stayed where she was, and quietly got his dinner started. And, to her surprise, Anton came out to dinner when she called him. She had obviously been cleaning in his absence, and he was impressed to see that, rather than try to approach him and eat her dinner with him, she was cleaning up after herself in the kitchen instead. That was good. He had had enough of her talking about things he had no sympathy for. After dinner and the washing up was done, Audrey tentatively approached the lounge room where Anton was sitting and carefully sat down next to him. He ignored her. She may have done her duty by finally making him dinner and cleaning the apartment up, but that didn't mean all was forgiven. After half an hour of ignoring his wife to make a point, Anton finally put his phone away and turned to Audrey. He knew that things had been hard for her, learning to look after Cassie and everything, and that had been why he'd held back for so long about the housework. He hadn't meant to bring it up like that anyway, and he was truly sorry for snapping like he had. Audrey had to understand a few things though. He was her husband, and she was his wife, and they had a child together. They were a family, and everyone in the family had a duty and a role to play. Anton was the breadwinner, and Audrey the homemaker. That was what they had decided, And just like he'd tried to stay out of the housework and childcare, she had to stay out of his work decisions. Anton was going to Mount Komorabi. That much had already been decided by Anton, and Audre would just have to learn to get used to it because the paperwork had already been filed. He'd originally meant to take his time before departing, but given everything that they were going through at home, he had spent the last 3 days expediting matters. He was now leaving the next day. That was when Audre lost it all over again, and Anton couldn't help but feel a quick moment of satisfaction as she realised how completely and utterly he'd won this argument. She wasn't going to hold his career back. He wasn't a cruel man. At least, he didn't think he was. But Audrey's moping had definitely brought out an uglier side of his personality. If he was being honest, Anton resented Audre. He'd given her everything she'd ever asked for, even a baby. Yet she was still unhappy. She had been so beautiful, young, vibrant, and happy when they had first met. So much fun. And now she was dumpy, demanding, and depressed. He'd told her he was sad to go, but secretly, he was glad to be leaving her behind for Mount Komorabi. Anton left the next morning. He and Audre never really made up before he left either. They just sort of tiptoed around one another as Anton packed, before saying an awkward goodbye in the lounge room. Audre wished that things were different, but it was also complicated. She didn't want him to go, and he knew that. But she didn't want to be around him at the moment either. Could their marriage survive this? And that brings us to the end of Chapter 6 of Audre Whitman, the Audacious Maid. If you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can tune in soon to hear the next chapter. And hey, maybe think about sharing my channel with a friend. Or don't. It's your life. Anyway, bye!